Welcome to the Wealth Embodied podcast. I'm your host, Brianna Faringer, an attorney, spiritual guide, and wealth activator. I'm here to help you align your mindset for abundance and break through any glass ceilings with money. If you're ready to embrace your highest calling, manifest with more ease, and create a life that feels lighter and more aligned, then let's dive in. Hello, welcome to the Wealth Embodied podcast. I'm your host, Brianna. Hope you're having an amazing day. Thank you for tuning into this episode. So the topic I'm going to go over today, it is about exercising discernment when hiring people for services. And in particular, I'm going to talk about people who are selling themselves as coaches, guides, mentors. There's a lot of different titles people use. But I'm really talking about there's a huge industry of people out there who are selling, I think, personal growth services to people. Maybe I can just generally say that. They're not therapists. I'm talking about people who are in line with kind of the work I do. So I do money mindset work. I'm also a spiritual guide. I do have a coaching certificate. I don't call myself a coach, but I'm really talking about the area or group of people that kind of fall in line with the same kind of work that I do. And it relates to how they market themselves. And this topic, there are so many different areas this kind of goes into and bleeds into, and one of which is about judgments. And so I do want to talk about that for a moment before I really deep dive into some of this. I am not judging the way people market themselves. I know maybe it does sound like that a little bit, and when we get into examples of exactly what I'm talking about, I think you'll start to recognize the difference between an observation and a judgment. But I try to, for myself, be an observer of things and not a judger of things. I try very hard to do that. I practice at it. I will say that sometimes I do find myself judging other people or things, and I have to just really do some self-reflection on that, because I know that when we have judgments about other people or things, it's actually a reflection of something that is happening in ourselves that needs to be healed. And so when I talk about this, I have to be very cautious for myself that I'm not coming off as judgmental or that I'm not being judgmental. And the topic that I really want to get into is something that really bothers me, the way that some coaches market themselves. And the reason it bothers me is because I find it to be misleading. And I don't want that for people who are out there trying to figure out who they should purchase services from. And no, I am not the police of how people market themselves, but I have been in industries where I think people can be very easily taken advantage of. And I think there's a lot of misleading information out there, which I do think everyone intellectually knows, but I sometimes don't know if they know it when they see it. And one of the things that I find very misleading is when people are on social media marketing themselves by telling people how much money they make. That really bothers me for a lot of reasons, and I'll tell you why, which that's the main topic that I'm going to get into. But the reason I'm talking about judgments is because I do, like I said, I have to be very cautious for myself of when I see that kind of stuff as, am I being judgmental of this other person, or am I just observing something that I think might be misleading for, vulnerable people sometimes. And that is not always clear, but I point that out because judgments do affect us. We tend to think of judgments as being directed towards other people, but really it is how it usually relates back to some way about how we feel about ourselves, or something that is already needing or wanting to be healed. So I'm very aware of that. When I catch myself judging something, I have to say, Brianna, what is it that you're really bothered about by this? And what is it about yourself, like maybe a belief about yourself that you have, or something that's happening internally that is needing or wanting to be healed that relates to this judgment about another person or another thing? But the reason I get so bothered by people providing misleading information is because I see it constantly in the world that I work in my legal practice. So I represent taxpayers against the IRS, and you do not need to be a lawyer to do that. And the result of that is there are a lot of people that do the same kind of work that myself and the other lawyers in my law firm do. And some of them do a very good job, and some of them do not do a good job at all. And what happens that I see very frequently is, number one, taxpayers are very, very vulnerable when they have a problem with the IRS because it's a very difficult system to navigate. The procedures are difficult, the law is difficult. It's just a lot of things that people don't understand. And when they go to what they believe is a professional who they've paid a lot of money to help them, what I find is there are a lot of, we call them tax resolution firms, that just take people's money and don't do anything for them. Or they put everyone into certain types of programs and they often don't qualify. And so having people being taken advantage of and receiving misleading information is something that happens a lot in my world as a lawyer. That is not what I'm talking about today, but it is one of the reasons that it does make me really mad when I see other coaches or mentors or guides in the same space as me on social media providing what I think is very misleading information. And I will say, I don't think a lot of times people are intending to be misleading. I think they are sometimes giving factual information, and the way that it is perceived by people consuming the content is maybe different than what the person is intending when they're, creating the post or putting out content. And so I'll give you some examples. There are tons of people on like Instagram, TikTok, all sorts of stuff. I'm not on every platform, but they'll be putting out how much money they make, or they'll be showing screenshots of how much money is coming into their business. That's fine and great. I'm not judging that. The thing that I have a hard time with is people will put out that information and it doesn't tell the full story. So somebody can be making multiple six figures, even having multiple seven-figure business. That does not mean that that person is making that much money. And I think a lot of people listening to this probably recognize that, but I don't know for sure that everyone does, and I'll tell you why. There's people on social media that will be like, I made 7 figures last year. They didn't make 7 figures. They might have. The more likely thing that happened is their business had gross revenue of $1 million plus, and after that person took into account business expenses, including all of the people that they had to pay to help support them, and taxes, they are left with a very different number. I point that out because there are people that are using the amount of money they make to get other people to hire them, but I don't think they're giving people the full story. And I'm not telling people that if you're going to put that out there, you need to also release your tax returns. What I am saying is I think for people who are considering hiring coaches, I would be more discerning about the reasons that you hire them than just based on the amount of money that they say that they're making. So somebody making 6 and 7 figures in their business may only be bringing home $75,000 a year. That doesn't mean they're not great at what they do. That doesn't mean that they're not successful. You don't have to make tons of money to be successful. I do, however, think that if you are going to use that as part of your marketing strategy, you have to recognize that you are kind of like opening the door up for people to have this conversation of like, is that person really making that amount of money? Because they're probably not. I'll tell you that this is one thing that I have a really hard time with. The thing that makes me the most angry is when I see people calling themselves millionaires online. Some of them might be, some of them might not be. And maybe this just comes down to different definitions of what is a millionaire. I define a millionaire as somebody who has $1 million plus in assets. I do believe a lot of coaches call themselves millionaires because their business has brought in more than $1 million. That's not the same thing. So I'm saying that just because I would proceed with caution when people are calling themselves millionaires. I know people who are calling themselves millionaires online and who I know are not, at least under the standard that I know a millionaire to be. So the reason that's important is because I don't think it's authentic. And I don't also believe that these coaches are intending to be inauthentic. I think that they think that what they're saying is true. I'm not sure that they recognize how misleading that can be to a person that's consuming the content. So when I see somebody that says they're a millionaire, That to me is a person has at least $1 million plus in assets. And it takes a long time to acquire $1 million in assets. It takes much longer to do that than just making $1 million in your business, because of business expenses and taxes. So again, their business can be generating $1 million a year. They might only be bringing home $100,000. And then after they have their personal expenses to pay for, they have nothing left. So they may have zero in assets. That's not a millionaire. That is a person who has a business generating 7 figures. They're not the same thing. And I'm talking about this because I do think it's important for people to recognize that when they are consuming content from people. This may not be a big deal to other people. It is just a big deal to me because I feel, I don't know, I don't like it when people are taken advantage of. And, people have the ability to exercise their own, whatever they think about a person's content, how they consume it, what they think about it. A lot of people probably don't care. They're like, I don't care how much money that person is making. That's not how I'm going to make my decision on them being my coach. And that's actually part of what I wanted to talk about today was, I think, something I experience with people regularly in my practice is them not being able to make decisions, or I don't want to say they're not good at making decisions because I don't like to perceive things like, think of things as good or bad. I think they just are. And I think every decision is helping move us along to where we're supposed to be. But when I think about people that have a hard time making decisions and people who are not always that discerning about who they give their money to, I would say be very cautious about giving your money to coaches, mentors, guides, anyone, just because they're saying how much money they make. That might be fine and great. They might be making millions of dollars and that might be legitimate, but that doesn't mean they're the coach or guide for you. And that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to make you millions. They might, but they might not. So there's a lot of people that I know that I have met that are making millions of dollars. I know legitimately they are doing some very similar work to what I do. And I know they're helping a lot of people, but they are not that's not a person I would hire because I don't vibe with that person. For me to hire a person, I have to know a lot more about them than how much money they're saying they make on Instagram or TikTok or whatever else the thing is. Like, that's great that they make a lot of money. That may not mean that they're going to be the right person for me. And so, I don't know, this is just something I kind of throw out there for people to think about. I kind of wish I had someone as a guest on to talk about this, and I might invite somebody on so that we can dive into this topic more. But, if this is something that you have comments about, I would love it if you would DM me on Instagram, or you can shoot me an email or something like that, because I'd like to know what people think about it. Do you care if people are saying how much they make? Does it cause you to be like, ick, I don't like that? I will say for myself, I do put posts on Instagram that talk about, making multiple 6 figures as a lawyer. That's absolutely true. But that being said, of course, that's reduced by taxes. I think people have an easier time conceptualizing that when they think about a person being an employee versus somebody who owns their own business. But the reason I talk about that is because my journey going through, changing my beliefs around money started when I recognized I had a real issue with my beliefs around money. It was when I was making the most money I've ever made in my life, and I was making multiple 6 figures. Yes, of course, that was being reduced by taxes. So what I take home is not the same as the salary that I was actually earning. But yes, I was making the most money I'd ever made, and I was still recognizing that I constantly worried about money. So if you see my Instagram posts, I do use that to talk about it because it's to show people that it doesn't matter how much money you have, you can suffer from money mindset issues, worries, fear, anxiety around money that affect not only how much money you make, but how you go through life. And so that's the reason I talk about it, because a lot of people tend to think that people only have money mindset issues because they're poor. That is absolutely not the truth. It's most people, no matter how much money they make, if they haven't done a lot of work on themselves, on healing things that need to be healed, on continuing a journey of personal growth, they can get a ton of money and they're still going to be miserable. And it's something I see very regularly in my practice. People get the very thing that they think they wanted and they're still not happy. So, yes, if you see my Instagram posts, you might see things like, yes, I was earning multiple six figures when I learned I had a chronic health issue that was resolved by me, changing my mindset around money. That's absolutely true. What I'm talking about is people posting things on their social media that's like, I'm a millionaire making all of this money planning retreats, or like living in a foreign country, and I can show you how to do it too. I think those people are authentic, by the way. I do think that those people are making a lot of money. Do I think they're millionaires? I don't. Because, going back to what I said before, a millionaire to me is somebody who has $1 million of assets plus. And I do think that's in line with the true definition of a millionaire. Somebody can go look it up if they want. So I just think it's misleading when people say that. And I think it just really hits a chord for me because I am so concerned about people being taken advantage of. I have represented so many taxpayers in situations where they've gone and paid other people at tax resolution firms thousands of dollars and have gotten absolutely no resolve whatsoever on their issue, and then they have to come to us and pay us money to actually fix it for them. And that makes me really angry. I don't like it when people are taken advantage of. I especially don't like it when people that are in vulnerable situations are taken advantage of, because I think those people may not always have the ability to exercise discernment in the way a rational thinking person would if they don't have like a really big problem in their lives. But, so if you're listening to this and you're like, this is not a big deal, totally fine. I get it. It's a topic that I talk about because it's often talked about amongst other coaches that I'm friends with or mentors that I have as coaches, is kind of this ick factor about people constantly talking about how much money they make. To me, there's a way to do it that is not misleading. There's a way to do it that's not like ick. And sometimes I just feel like I know it when I see it. And again, I have to go back to what I was talking about in the beginning with judgments is, am I judging these people because I wouldn't necessarily do it that way? Or does it just bother me because it's misleading? And I have to really be cautious of that because it's not up to me to judge what their content is. People can decide whether or not they want to purchase from them, but I think it's a conversation worth having and talking about more and more. I do think it's very important for people to talk about money, number one. I also think it's very important for people to celebrate their wins. And I do applaud those people to the extent they are being authentic and truthful and not misleading people with their content. I do applaud them for being willing and able to put that out to the world and celebrate it, because I think it's important to see other people succeeding. I think it's important to celebrate your wins. I think it's important to share your wins with people. I think we all too often get to a place where we don't do that because it comes off as bragging. And I am a huge proponent of people celebrating their wins, whatever they are. And if that means you're making a ton of money, that is awesome. I love it. I just think that there is a way to be very authentic to yourself as a person and a brand, and do that in a way that's not misleading to people. So I don't know, just kind of something to think about. Again, if people have comments about this, or if this is something you hate, or if this is something you're like, you have a different perspective on, I would love to hear it. And if you do DM me, I would certainly, I'd love to get stuff like that, because it could be something that might be useful to have a further discussion on another podcast episode, or maybe, you could even come on as a guest and talk about it. I just like to have more thought-provoking discussions around this stuff, being able to talk about money, being able to talk about maybe some of these areas where we have an ick around people talking about it, how we can move through it. But I really just more wanted to talk about this to give people an opportunity to be a little bit more discerning about people that they hire. Because I do think a lot of people fall into the trap of, oh my gosh, this person is making millions of dollars, they're going to help me do that. That may or may not be true. And I have, not just a belief, my knowledge of my own experience and others is that if you do not energetically vibe with a person, it doesn't matter how great they are as a coach, mentor, or whatever their title is that they call themselves. If you energetically don't vibe with them, if you don't feel aligned with them, they might not be able to do anything for you. And so for me, I'm just very, very discerning about the people I hire. There's tons of great coaches out there. There's tons of great coaches, mentors, guides that I know. I think they're awesome. I would definitely recommend people work with them. They might not be some person that I would want to work with though, because we are not all for everyone. Not everyone is our client. Not everyone is our coach or mentor. So this is really about, I think, having some awareness about the marketing strategies that people use, particularly when they are talking about how much money they have, and exercising more discernment about the people that you do and don't give your money to. So again, I would love it if you'd write in some comments on this. If you don't have any, no problem. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day.
Hey, before you go, would you love to receive my 3-step masterclass to easily create and hold wealth for free? It's called Effortless Money, and it includes the exact framework to start attracting money effortlessly and manifesting abundance with more ease. If you want it for free, all you have to do is leave an honest review of the Wealth Embodied podcast, take a screenshot of this episode and put it in your Instagram stories and tag me at Brianna_Faringer, and we will send you the free Effortless Money Masterclass. This is how my clients have manifested a $13,000 check, a promotion resulting in a $30,000 salary increase, and significantly improved relationships. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next time on the Wealth Embodied podcast.